Story 8, The Papal Court and Escaping a Diagnosis. He was running. Not physically, no, walking was already a struggle, especially on the cobblestones of Burgos streets. He was running inside, from the diagnosis, from the doctor's words, from the second opinion that echoed the first. He didn't know what to do next. And so, he ended up in the Vatican, as people do when they've nowhere else to go. He sat in the shade to the right of the square, where tourists snap up plastic statuettes and shout into their phones. He stared at the basilica, feeling everything that once mattered, deals, titles, even his children, fade away. All that remained was silence. And the impossibility of changing anything. But in his pocket was an old tube of liners. And a piece of thick paper. He'd meant to keep a symptom journal, as the doctor had asked. He never did. Instead, he pulled out a pen and began to draw, not the facade, not the perspective, but a strange, tangled web of capillaries that slowly became branches, roots, the framework of a dome. He was drawing his body, as a mechanism. And, in doing so, he was drawing hope. With every line, he began to see not destruction, but structure. He remembered teaching his students long ago, any system, if you understand it, can be adapted. Even a damaged one. A passing monk glanced at the paper and said, "You're not drawing a dome. You're drawing a way out." He didn't reply. He just kept going. Half an hour later, the drawing was done. It wasn't a portrait of illness. It was a blueprint for resilience. He didn't heal. But he faced treatment differently, with a notebook. When the doctor flipped through its pages, he asked, "Did you track the side effects?" He answered, "I tracked the will to return." This story isn't about a miracle. It's about the moment a line on paper becomes a rope to grab hold of. And climb. Maybe not out of illness. But out of despair, for certain. Story 3, The Meetings Cancelled, Testaccio, a Roman Market, and a Broken Schedule. He arrived in Rome not by choice, not on his terms, a contract with a big client, a last-minute trip, a cancelled flight, lost luggage, and a sleepless night in a transit hotel where even the sheets smelled of exhaustion. Everything that could go wrong did, spectacularly. And when he showed up at 9 a.m., eyes swollen, clutching vending machine coffee, standing before the locked doors of a meeting room on the Aventine Hill, he was told the meeting was postponed. To tomorrow. No explanation that he stepped outside, irritated, thrown off his rhythm, and just started walking, aimlessly at first, then along the Tiber, past the Pyramid of Cestius, to an ancient cemetery where poets rest, where it was, infuriatingly, too quiet. He had no task, no goal, not even a map, just a strange feeling that if he didn't break free from himself, from his calendar, from his ambitions, he'd explode. That he ended up at the Testaccio market. A typical Roman market, meat, fruit, smells, plastic, dust, loud voices. He ordered a panini, sat at a plastic table in the corner, and pulled a notebook from the familiar pocket of his jacket, the one he always used for sketching logos, diagrams, roadmaps. But this time, he didn't open it to plan. He started drawing the vendor slicing Parmesan. Then a woman with baguettes in her cart. Then a crumbling facade that would have faded from memory in 5 minutes if not for the ink. And suddenly, time moved differently, not by the clock, not by Google Calendar, but by the shifting shadows and the scent of tomatoes in the air. That he spent the whole day like that, sketching the market, the stalls, the people, the pauses, the graffiti-covered walls. And only late that evening did he realize he'd forgotten what day of the week it was, for the first time in years. Not because he was tired, but because he'd finally exhaled. The next day, when the meeting actually happened, he pulled out his tablet to show the mock-up. But then he realized the real thing worth showing wasn't the presentation, it was that notebook. The client flipped through it in silence, pausing on one page, a stall with artichokes, the dome of a church rising behind it. He nodded. "You know how to see the city. So you'll see our project just as clearly." And in that moment, he understood, it wasn't Rome that changed him. It was the pause, forced, frustrating, but a gift. A glitch in the schedule was sometimes the only chance to notice the rhythm you're really living in. For lessons on Italian sketching techniques and quick drawing, check the profile and video description. Eduard Kichigin. Story 2, Rimini. The Builder and the Fallen Wall. His name was Luca, and he was the foreman on a construction site for a new hotel wing by the Rimini coast. Tough, quiet, precise, he knew how to manage men, cranes, concrete mixers, and deadlines. But one night, after a heavy rain, a load-bearing wall they'd built the day before collapsed. No one was hurt, but in the morning, when he saw the heap of rubble and rebar, it was as if something inside him shattered. He'd been certain of his calculations, his team, the soil, even the supplier, and yet, something had gone wrong. Engineers launched an investigation, management demanded a culprit, the insurance company hunted for a scapegoat, and Luca himself searched for the mistake that had brought it all down. But the error eluded him in the numbers and spreadsheets. Luca left the site for 3 days, not saying a word to anyone. He rented a room at a guest house near Ponte Tiberio, the ancient Roman bridge that had weathered countless disasters. That evening, sitting alone by the canal, he pulled out a pencil for the first time in decades. Not a calculator, not a tablet, just a pencil and a notebook. And he drew. Not a blueprint. Not a diagram. But a process. A sequence, how they poured the concrete, how the upper belt held, how the supports were fixed, where the rainwater drained, how the lines of stress flowed. He drew like a mechanic, like a director, scene by scene. On the third day, it hit him, a temporary brace was missing where the gravel had been washed out. No one had noticed because, on paper, it seemed trivial. But in his sketch, visual, schematic, alive, it stood out like a bone jutting through skin. He returned. He fixed it. He explained. And he began teaching the young builders not just to follow plans but to draw with their eyes, as he called it. Now, every new apprentice on his crew carries a notebook. Not for notes. For understanding. And when someone asks why he keeps a pencil in his pocket, he doesn't answer with words. He shows them a drawing of a wall that fell. And one where it stands. Between them, a single line. And his entire life. For lessons on Italian sketching techniques and quick drawing, check the profile and video description. Eduard Kichigin. Story 4, The Problem Isn't the Building, Renovation in San Lorenzo and a $1 million mistake. He was certain he had it all figured out. An architect from Northern Europe, with a flawless portfolio, awards stacked up, Excel sheets down to the decimal, and a team that calculated every detail. He arrived in Rome to lead the renovation of an old complex on the edge of San Lorenzo, former barracks they wanted to transform into an art cluster, a new community hub, a beacon of progress and energy. The funding came from the EU, the deadlines were brutal, and the pressure was unrelenting. Trouble started right away. Local activists were upset, neighbors grumbled about the noise, historians protested the demolition of original walls. But the real issue? The project just wasn't coming together. Something about it didn't feel alive. It was correct. But lifeless. Like the building itself was pushing back. One evening, after another round of fruitless debates, he stayed behind at the site, alone. His phone was at 3% battery. In the background, a rusted hanger, shadows from streetlights, graffiti scrawled on the walls. He sat on a crate and pulled out a pencil. Not to work. Just to think. He started sketching, not facades or cross-sections, but people. How they'd walk in. How they'd glance around. How they'd sip coffee by a wall. He drew a boy kicking a ball across the gravel. A woman leaning against a column, waiting for someone. As he drew, it hit him, something simple. He'd been designing a building, but not a life. This place. It was alive. Rough. Unpolished. Real. It didn't need reconstruction. It needed to be listened to. The next day, he scrapped everything. The old renders, the presentation, the model. He brought the curators a stack of his late-night sketches and said, let's start here. With the human. At first, they thought he'd lost it. Then, they called him indecisive. Later, just plain weird. But that approach? It became the heart of the project. Now, his studio gets invited back to Italy, not for their style, but for their ability to feel a place. Not through pixels, but through the hand. Through a sketch. Through silence. Check out lessons on Italian sketching techniques and quick drawing in the profile and video description. Eduard Kichigin.